In this inaugural episode of Car Heroes, we're going to talk about my favourite driver of all time, Sebastian Vettel, who started karting at only 3 years of age and went on to win his first race in spectacular fashion in the wet, and leapt from that to spectacular highs of being thought of as the next Schumacher, only to make the age-old mistake of joining Ferrari and ending on a dramatic low of 2020. But there was a lot in between and some great moments after that. So we're going to talk about this in this very first episode as we talk about one of those brilliant people who are not just our heroes, they're car heroes. Welcome to Current Combustion. I'm Jason Hassett, and let's get into it. Hello everybody, and welcome to the very first episode of this new series on Current Combustion to kind of go along with the story time vibe. But this is Car Heroes, where Storytime celebrates the companies and the cars that we all love and know, basically the machines that put them together, as well as the machines themselves. This is focused on the people, and we'll be covering everything from Formula One drivers to captains of industry to engineers like Adrian Newey, Chapman himself, and people who were in cocaine busts like DeLorean. But today we're going to go back through the history of my favorite driver of all time, Sebastian Vettel. And if you're an F1 fan, there's a good chance you've come across this man and you probably enjoy his work as well. I think he has been spectacular in his history in that he's gone from a driver that we all thought, or at least us fans, as well as a lot of the media, to be fair, thought would be the next Michael Schumacher. He was on that trajectory. And then it fell apart spectacularly, and over the coming years, it never quite went back. So I'm looking forward to jumping back into this because I watched not his junior career, but his Formula One career I watched live. And, you know, it's one of those things, it's, what is it? It's nearly 2 decades now since he joined the sport. So it's going to be interesting learning a bit about his junior career and his life, but more so jumping into his Formula One career to see how much of this I actually remember. And as always in these series, if I miss something or if I get something wrong, please let us know in the comments. The idea of these is to get a community of people interested in these stories to all share and learn with each other, because it's fun to learn about this sort of thing. So without further ado, remember, these aren't just our heroes, they're car heroes. And this is Sebastian Vettel. Let's hop in. So Sebastian Vettel was born in 1987, July 3rd. 2 years older than me. I'm June 2nd, 1989. So he's not too far away. He was born in Heppenheim in West Germany, growing up with 2 older sisters, Melanie and Stephanie, and a younger brother, Fabian, who funnily enough also pursued racing. One thing I do know about his childhood is that he says he idolized the 3 Michaels: Michael Jackson, Michael Jordan, and Michael Schumacher, one of which he would go on to emulate massively. And you guessed it, Michael Jackson. In fact, young Seb dreamt about being a singer before he ever dreamt about driving fast cars. Thankfully, that kind of worked out for us, right? He also developed an old soul taste in music and comedy early on, collecting Beatles vinyls and reciting lines from Monty Python sketches, traits that would later endear him to fans. Huge fan of Monty Python and Aryan-looking people. So, Vettel was brilliant for me. Vettel's racing story kicked off practically in diapers. He first sat in a kart at the age of 3 and began racing competitively at only 8 years of age. By 1998, at just 11 years old, he caught the eye of Red Bull's junior program. I don't think that is a joke about Helmut Marko, but it could be. I don't remember when we wrote this. He piled up trophies in youth karting, most notably winning the Junior European Karting Championship in 2001 at the age of 13, showcasing a precocious speed that had observers buzzing about the tiny kid from Heppenheim. He switched to single-seaters in 2003, starting with the Formula BMW ADAC Championship with Eifelland Racing. And it was a mixed bag. He wasn't spectacular, wasn't awful. Not the Sebastian that we would see later on. However, in 2004, he switched teams to Muka Motorsport, and he absolutely dominated the season, winning 18 races out of 20. And he got pole position in 19 of those 20 races, clinching the championship by a huge margin. And this is on top of the fact that he had also got a chance to drive a champ car at only 15 years of age, thanks to his success in karting. By this stage, in 2004, the future looked absolutely spectacular for the young German. And this earned him his move up to Formula 3. He competed with ASM in 2005, who were the top team in Formula 3 at the time. He finished 5th overall and won the Rookie Cup as the best first-year driver. Interestingly, the driver who actually won the championship that year was someone you may be aware of, Lewis Hamilton, who won the Formula 3 championship in 2005. Interestingly, in 2004, his first year in Formula 3, he finished 5th as well. So an interesting kind of gather between the two. In 2006, he finished runner-up, finishing 2nd in the championship behind his teammate Paul di Resta, who we know went on to be a multiple world champion. However, during the 2006 season, he also was putting his fingers into other pies as he joined the Formula 3.5 Renault series as well to try and get as much seat time as possible. And by this stage, he was catching the eye of a lot of the big wigs around the world, as even though he didn't win the Formula 3 series, he had very consistent pace and race-winning ability. He won his debut race in Formula Renault 3.5 that season in Misano, and it was a rare feat in what at the time was a very, very competitive field. During a 2006 race at Spa-Francorchamps, he suffered a freak accident where debris from another car sliced the top of his index finger, but he continued racing despite the injury. In 2006, though, BMW Sauber gave Vettel a huge opportunity, which he grabbed with both hands, to be the youngest ever driver at the time to test a Formula 1 car at only 19 years and 53 days old. And in true Vettel fashion, he also managed to get a fine for breaking the pit lane speed limiter 9 seconds into his Formula 1 career, something he would laugh off almost immediately. His pace in testing was eye-opening, and at the 2006 Italian GP, he even topped the timesheets in Friday practice, hinting that he was more than ready to jump into the big leagues. And that opportunity would knock in 2007, in June, when BMW's then driver Robert Kubica had an absolutely incredible crash during the Canadian Grand Prix, as many of you, I'm sure, probably remember. However, this did give the then still 19-year-old Sebastian Vettel his chance at a full race weekend at the following United States Grand Prix. He qualified 7th and finished 8th, scoring a championship point in his very first race in Formula 1 and signalling that he had not only the pace, but also the talent and also the will to jump in and take that pressure. That also made him at the time the youngest driver in Formula 1 history to score a point in F1. Fun fact as well, that very weekend, Sebastian Vettel also promised to try not to crash Michael Schumacher's road car, which Michael had lent him for the weekend to use to get around. Red Bull, who had been grooming Vettel, much like Michael Jackson had been grooming other young talents, then put their eye on the ball and decided that it was probably time to get the young German to the seat. By July of the same year, they released him from BMW and promptly placed him in the junior team Scuderia Toro Rosso to race full-time from the Hungarian Grand Prix onwards. Vettel was of course teamed up that season with Vitantonio Liuzzi, and he quickly justified this move because at a rain-soaked Japanese Grand Prix at Fuji that year, he was running in 3rd place behind just Lewis Hamilton and Mark Webber until he did the ultimate baller move and under the safety car crashed into the back of Mark Webber, who was driving at the main team, which wasn't a great look and Mark Webber wasn't that happy about. But alas, he was running in 3rd. A livid Webber railed. It's kids, isn't it? Kids with not enough experience. You do a good job and then they fuck it all up. A harsh rebuke that briefly dented Vettel's spirits, but he'd dent a lot more than Webber's spirits a bit later on. He was initially penalised, but after video evidence showed Hamilton's erratic driving may have contributed, quelle surprise, the stewards lifted Seb's grid penalty. Just 1 week later in China, Vettel bounced back in style, charging from 17th on the grid to finish 4th in mixed conditions. It was Toro Rosso's best result to date and a clear message that Vettel had fucking arrived. Even Mazepin at the time said something along the lines of, he's definitely the next guy. He basically said, he said he's fast, intelligent, and very interested in the technical side. Basically, the three things that you would want from a racing driver. But Vettel's first full season in Formula One would be even more magic as he continued with the Toro Rosso team into 2008. It began quite badly. In the first 4 races, he had 4 DNFs, 3 of which were lap 1 accidents. But the young German kept his head down, learned from his struggles, and he scored his first points that May in Monaco, skillfully taking a 5th place finish on the treacherous street. Toro Rosso's technical director noted that something clicked in Vettel around the European GP in Valencia, and suddenly Seb unlocked both raw speed and consistency, whereas before he seemed to have one or the other. From that moment, his performance went through the roof. And as you're probably aware, the big breakthrough came in Monza. In a wet qualifying in Monza, Vettel stunned the paddock by grabbing pole position, becoming F1's youngest pole sitter ever. Come race day, under pouring rain, he drove flawlessly and kept at the front, leading most laps and winning by 12.5 seconds. Not only at 21 years and 74 days old did this make Vettel the youngest F1 race winner in history, he also did it on merit. Other drivers made mistakes and, there wasn't like there was crashes or anything ahead. He just drove brilliantly. But on top of that, Red Bull, the main team, hadn't even won a race yet. He was in the junior team running basically Newey's leftovers and a thankfully Ferrari engine, but it was sheer brilliance. It was a fairy tale. Tiny Toro Rosso B team using a year-old Red Bull leftover chassis from Adrian Newey scored its first and only win in its history. Remember when Gasly won, it was AlphaTauri. Vettel's emotional Italian GP triumph earned him instant legend status, and fans began to dub him the baby Schumi, especially because he won with a Ferrari engine at the Italian Grand Prix in a team that was, lest we forget, Italian as Minardi and still operated in Faenza. Toro Rosso's part owner Gerhard Berger gushed that Vettel would be a future world champion, and oh how right he was. And even more notably than that, by the end of the 2008 season, he had outscored both of the Red Bull main drivers, signaling to Red Bull that change was to come. This also meant the end of David Coulthard, but, he's doing all right. Vettel immediately formed a potent pairing with Australian Mark Webber in the team's RB5 car. Vettel started their year strong. There were a few hiccups, fierce battle in Melbourne where Seb collided with Robert Kubica while fighting for P2, denying both of them a podium. But just one race later, in the wet Chinese Grand Prix, Vettel delivered Red Bull its maiden pole and first victory. Remember, Red Bull still hadn't won at this point. He added wins at Silverstone, Suzuka, and that year's inaugural Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Vettel's 4 wins and consistent podiums made him something that Leclerc probably hates the name of, vice champion at just 22, finishing runner-up to Jenson Button. And to be fair, if it wasn't for the incredibly strong start of Jenson Button and Brawn, it was likely he would have won. Just unfortunately, Brawn saw something that Newey and the rest of the grid hadn't and took the season with a bang. And Vettel that year also won the DHL Fastest Lap award for a string of fastest laps, showing his prodigious speed. It was also 2009 when I learned that Vettel was naming all of his cars, and we should track those going forward. The 2008 car was called Julie for his first full season, and the 2009 car was called Kate. Fun fact, after a chassis swap in 2009, Kate became Kate's dirty sister. In 2010, Vettel got a brand new car that was going to give him a jump in that season, and he named it Luscious Liz, although after a chassis change later on, it became Randy Mandy. The 2010 season was a roller coaster ride that ultimately crowned Vettel champion, but not without drama. He and Webber had the fastest car on the grid, but reliability gremlins and occasional driver errors kept the championship battle tight. Vettel kicked off with a pole in Bahrain, only to lose a sure win due to a spark plug failure. He notched an early victory in Malaysia, yet tensions inside Red Bull soon flared. In Turkey, Seb attempted a pass on Webber for the lead, and the resulting collision between the two Red Bulls knocked Vettel out on the spot. Neither driver initially took blame, igniting a fierce media debate over which Red Bull driver was the bad guy. Later that year at Silverstone, Red Bull created more controversy by giving Vettel the new front wing upgrade first, which caused a lot of anger within the team, and this was clearly pointed out as Webber went on to win the race. Webber did win the race though, and pointed out straight afterwards, I can't remember whether it was on the radio or in the cool down room, probably on the radio, not bad for a number 2 driver, eh? Despite the internal friction, Vettel kept his championship bid alive. And by the time we got to Abu Dhabi, he was third in the points, having not led the championship at any point throughout the 2010 season. I believe at that point it was Alonso and Webber leading and Lewis was in 4th, if I'm not mistaken. In a pressure-filled finale, Vettel was flawless. He took pole and won the race. Alonso got stuck behind Vitaly Petrov because, well, Alonso was driving a Ferrari, so it was bound to go wrong. And Webber's race fell apart, with Hamilton also just too far back to take enough points to win the race. Vettel clinched the 2010 World Drivers' Championship by just 4 points. But nonetheless, this made him the youngest world driver in history at just 23 years old, a stat that is still yet to be broken. In 2011, he got his hands on the next Nui creation, the RB7, which he would call Kinky Kylie. Vettel and Red Bull ascended to another level, producing one of the most dominant seasons in F1 lore. Armed with the superb RB7 chassis, Seb was practically untouchable. He won 11 of the 19 Grand Prix that year and took an astounding 15 pole positions. By the Japanese Grand Prix in October, Vettel had already sealed the championship, with 4 races to spare. Sound familiar, Verstappen fans who keep telling me that Vettel was never seen as the next Schumacher in the same way Verstappen is, but I'm telling you that it was definitely the case, and we're not even at the part yet where it's so similar. At 24 years of age, this made him still the youngest double champion ever, and he podiumed 17 races and amassed a record 392 points that year. Whether it was dueling wheel-to-wheel or controlling races from the front, Vettel showcased maturity beyond his years. There were still occasional team orders, for instance at Silverstone, which Webber ignored and tried to attack Vettel for the position, but Vettel had firmly become Red Bull's lead driver, and there were some memorable moments like Vettel winning at Monaco after nursing worn tyres for 56 laps. And Vettel by this stage had also trademarked his legendary one-finger win salute. You see, things get muddled when you go back to the past, but yes, at this point in time, comparisons were being made to Schumacher because not only was he incredibly fast, he was also ruthless and he could fight wheel to wheel. On top of all of that, he was very technical and dealt with the technical team, helping as much as he could with driver feedback, something that Schumacher was well known for, especially at Ferrari. You see, right now in our timeline, because of what happened after Red Bull, people just assume that Vettel was never seen in the same breath that Verstappen is now. And while I think, and I do, put Verstappen ahead of Vettel in my driver all-time rankings, it just goes to show how quickly things could change, because at the end of 2013, for example, you'd definitely be putting him up there, but that is getting slightly ahead. The point I was trying to get to, though, is as these couple of years as champion went on, we know that he could fight wheel to wheel. We know he was brave. And yet I distinctly remember a lot of people within maybe a season or two of this saying, yeah, but Vettel can only win from the front. Something he proved wrong over and over again, but recency bias always wins out. Can you tell I'm a Vettel fan? In 2012, Vettel was given his new RB8, which he called Abbey. Unlike the catwalk of 2011, though, 2012 would be a much different beast, as Ferrari gave Alonso a shitty car, but a shitty car that Alonso could drive. Vettel's 2012 campaign was a nail-biter, and I still maintain that the 2012 season is the best season in recent history. 2021 can go fuck itself. The season was a dogfight primarily against Ferrari's Fernando Alonso, and early on Vettel had mixed fortune. He won in Bahrain and grabbed the points lead, but a few races later, an alternator failure while leading in Valencia handed a win to Alonso and set Vettel back. He had also some less flattering moments, such as calling backmarker Kartikeyan a cucumber after a collision in Malaysia, drawing a crybaby retort from Lorraine, and, as you can tell, not much has changed among Formula One and name calling and so on. By late summer, though, Vettel trailed Alonso by 39 points. If you weren't watching back then, Alonso was very close to winning 5 championships, and this was one of them. However, then came a decisive surge. Not Sergio Perez. Doesn't matter. Vettel won 4 races in a row in Asia, Singapore, Japan, Korea, and India, to overturn Alonso's lead. The title went down to the final race in Brazil, with Vettel holding a 13-point edge. In a dramatic opening lap at Interlagos, Vettel's car was clipped and spun around, leaving him dead last with damage. This race was spectacular, and I remember biting my nails off watching it. Vettel went on an absolute charge. He didn't give up, and he put his head down, and by the end of the race, he got up to 6th place, passing, being somewhat let by his hero and mentor, Michael Schumacher, who helped him out a little bit. This gave him a 3-point margin, and at 25 made him the youngest triple champion in history. In 2013, Vettel would have one of the most dominant runs in Formula One history in the RB9, which he called Hungry Heidi. 2013 saw Vettel once again in devastating form, especially in the second half. He started the year with a bang, pole positions in the 2 first races, but also a major controversy at the Malaysian Grand Prix when Red Bull issued a coded team order that you may remember, Multi-21, which meant for the number 1 driver to stay behind the number 2 driver. Vettel, though, hungry for the win, ignored the order and overtook Webber to massive chaos. He seized victory, but Webber was furious, and even over the radio, Horner was heard saying, "Come on, Seb, this is silly." Their post-race cool-down room was icy, and Webber said Vettel would have protection as usual within the team. This was the breaking moment for this driver lineup and the point of no return to which both of them would no longer really have anything for each other. Vettel went on to become probably the nicest guy on the Formula One grid. But if you thought that and you weren't watching at the time, you may think that he wasn't the killer instinct driver that he was back in the day. The incident really messed up this driver lineup. Vettel initially apologized, but later admitted that if it happened again, he would do the exact same thing, saying that Webber basically didn't deserve the win. This earned Seb a bit of a villain reputation in some fans' eyes, and especially among the British media, who never, ever have any sort of bias, even towards someone who's not British, but from the former colonies. However, once the controversy subsided, Vettel unleashed an unstoppable streak of performances. He won in Bahrain and Canada, and a minor mid-season hiccup, a gearbox failure at Silverstone, only delayed the inevitable. Starting with the Belgian Grand Prix in late August, Vettel went on a 9-race consecutive win streak to close out the 2013 season and gain his title. A record that was only beaten in 2023 by Verstappen in an utterly dominant season by him in the RB19. You see, the two, they're not so different, Verstappen fans. I'm sorry. Stop revising history. 4 championships, falls apart on the 5th. Sounds familiar. The age of just 26, Vettel had joined Schumacher as the only driver to win 4 titles in a row in the modern era. A thing that obviously Verstappen has gone on to join, and Hamilton as well. His domination was so pronounced, oddly, that it led to boos from some of the crowd who grew tired of his winning and perhaps still miffed about Multi 21. Vettel admitted the booing hurt personally, but he kept his head down and just kept winning. One memorable image from India 2013 encapsulated Vettel's season. After clinching the title, he parked his Red Bull on the start-finish straight and bowed down to his car. In 2014, though, unfortunately, he'd get a new RB10, which he would call Susie. And in fairness, in terms of just pure aerodynamics, it was quite a decent car. However, it had a brand name in the engine that is synonymous with failure in modern Formula One, Renault. The massive rule change had come in. They had switched from V8s to V6s, and the competitive order had changed completely. Mercedes were now the dominant force, and Vettel was left in a dust with machinery that he couldn't fight with. Red Bull was no longer dominant, and Vettel had a challenging year. Australian young gun Daniel Ricciardo joined the team as Webber's replacement and immediately proved to be a formidable teammate. Vettel, for the first time in his F1 career, found himself struggling to master an unstable car and also the tricky new Pirelli tyre, something that also unfortunately dented the career of one of the would-be champions, Hülkenberg. Reliability bit him too. He retired in Australia, Monaco and Austria with mechanical issues, and Ricciardo meanwhile managed 3 race wins in RB10 where Vettel went winless all season. It was an uncharacteristic slump, and also, I believe, was the first time that a reigning world champion had gone winless in the following season as the incumbent since Villeneuve in 1998. By October, Vettel and Red Bull had announced that they would part ways at the end of the season, 1 year before his contract was meant to end in 2015. Vettel was ready to take on his childhood dream, and also to try and recreate the legendary status of his mentor, Michael Schumacher, and go to Ferrari. In fact, Vettel had also talked with Ferrari in 2012, initially planning to go there, maybe take on that. However, with Red Bull in flying form, and given Red Bull was, they had given him everything since his junior career, he felt loyalty to the team and wanted to keep winning. Again, all of this somewhat similar to what's going on right now, you could say. Obviously, very different situations, but somewhat similar in terms of loyalty and, things falling apart, not wanting to leave, all of these different things. Also, I do know that I believe at the end of 2011 or during 2012, he was approached by Mercedes. There's such revisionist history in Formula One by Lewis Hamilton fans who were like, no. They approached Lewis first. You're like, sure. The German team approached the British driver Hamilton, who had 1 championship, before they approached the then 2-time world champion from Germany, who was dominating, and the other 2-time world champion who was in the title fight in 2012, Alonso. But they went to Hamilton, who hadn't won a championship since 2007 first, instead of going to the German. Yeah, sure they did. Okay. Fair enough. Believe whatever you want. But yeah, he definitely was approached by Mercedes and also by Ferrari. Mercedes, obviously, as well, because of Schumacher. So, Schumacher was leaving. He obviously loved Seb, so he would have pointed things out. But I'm sure his advice would have been stay where you are. You're winning championships. Leave when it ends, which he did. Red Bull, though, didn't make this particularly easy for him, forbidding him from doing the post-season tests with Ferrari, trying to kind of hold him back. Obviously, they weren't too happy that he was leaving, but Vettel still showed up at Ferrari's garage just to soak in the atmosphere at that post-season test, and even snuck in an unofficial test in a 2-year-old Ferrari that they kept quite secret. Although 2014 was a humbling season for Vettel, winning no races and finishing 5th behind his young teammate, he had done everything he needed to do at Red Bull in their 6 seasons together. He scored 38 wins, 44 poles, and delivered 4 championships in an era that solidified both his legacy and Red Bull's place at the top of Formula One. He got the SF15T, though, the new red car for 2015 that he would nickname Eva. Joining Ferrari was the literal dream come true for Vettel, and he was unwilling to waste it. He often remarked how as a kid he idolised Schumacher's feats in the red car, and now he had a chance to wear the famous Rosso Corsa. He wasted no time in rekindling Ferrari's competitive fire, and in his very first race for the Scuderia in Australia in 2015, he finished on the podium, getting 3rd place behind the Mercedes. And 1 race later, at the Malaysian Grand Prix, in his 2nd race, Seb drove a brilliant race to beat the favoured duo and took his maiden win for Ferrari, doing it way faster than both Alonso and Hamilton so far. And before you say it, sprint races don't count, Hamilton said it himself. And this was no mean feat, because this was Ferrari's first victory in nearly 2 seasons. And an emotional Vettel, nearly in tears, paying tribute to his hero Michael Schumacher in the cool-down room, said without him and the work he did with Ferrari in the years before, this win wouldn't be possible. I'm very proud to become part of this history. By mid-season, Vettel had ran up more victories in Hungary, for example, where he touchingly dedicated it to the late Jules Bianchi, bringing the 2015 tally to 3, which was very respectable given where Ferrari was that season. He single-handedly hauled Ferrari back to respectability, and Vettel's consistently strong finishes earned him 3rd in the championship behind the dominant Rosberg-Hamilton Mercedes duo. Seb even endeared himself massively to the Italian Tifosi by learning Italian before joining the team and talking Italian on the radio calls when he won, as well as at the Italian Grand Prix, leading the entire crowd to the victory song, showing kind of how quickly he became Ferrari family. 2016 would see him in his new car, which he nicknamed Margherita, but it was something of a stagnant year for Vettel and Ferrari. The team's performance dipped to Mercedes and resurgent Red Bull, who had built back up with Newey's help and Dan Fallows and so on. And while Vettel did score several podiums, he scored no wins that season. This left him and the Tifosi increasingly frustrated. Several races were close misses. For example, in Canada, he led early, but strategic missteps, Ferrari Kel Surprise cost him the win. And in Australia, a red flag strategy error snatched a likely victory from him as well. Vettel's passion showed in some early race rants. Notably at the Mexican Grand Prix, he famously blew up at the race director Charlie Whiting over backmarker behaviour, dropping a few F-bombs, earning a post-race apology to Whiting. The season ended with Seb 4th in the points, and despite the challenges, Vettel continued to bond with teammate Kimi Räikkönen, and the two had formed a relationship, and he was ready to fight for a championship at the Scarlet Red team. 2017 saw him get his new car, which was nicknamed Gina, and it saw new technical regulations and thankfully a much improved Ferrari. This allowed Vettel to mount his first true title challenge in years against his old rival from Formula 3, Lewis Hamilton. Vettel came out swinging. He won the season opener in Australia, his first win in 18 months, and built momentum with victories in Bahrain and Monaco and a slew of P2 finishes. By mid-season, he led the championship by 14 points after a dominant Monaco win. Tensions flared dramatically in Baku under a safety car at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Vettel believed that Hamilton brake tested him, so he pulled alongside and bumped wheels intentionally with the Brit. The incident earned Seb a 10-second stop-go penalty during the race and later an FIA investigation. Ultimately, Vettel avoided further punishment by apologising and committing to community service, something which would come up once again with Verstappen later on, right? The championship swung back and forth. Vettel's lead shrank to a single point after a late puncture at Silverstone, dropping him down the order, and he rebounded back with a gritty win in Hungary. Unfortunately, Ferrari's charge faltered after the Asian swing, a first lap crash in Singapore with teammate Kimi Raikkonen and Red Bull's Verstappen knocked Vettel out while fighting for the lead. Engine gremlins then hit. He started last in Malaysia due to a turbo failure and retired from Japan with a spark plug issue. And these blows handed Hamilton a decisive advantage. Vettel kept fighting, taking pole in Mexico, which happened to be his 50th career pole, but a collision with Hamilton at the start of the race dashed any remaining title hopes. Hamilton clinched the title, leaving Vettel runner-up for 2017, something that Ferrari is just too used to. By this stage as well, Vettel was becoming one of the most likeable drivers on the grid, and post-season, he also went and made sure that there was no love lost between him and Lewis Hamilton, and the two of them exchanged kind words and even helmets with each other to solidify their friendship, which would be a beautiful one going forward. In 2018, he entered Loria. That was his car name, doesn't matter. And that season became known at the time as the Fight for Five, as both Vettel and Hamilton were fighting for their 5th championship that season. Ferrari gave Vettel a very quick car, and again, he started strong. Seb won the opening 2 races in Australia and Bahrain, and by summer, he was neck and neck with Hamilton. One of the main highlights was Vettel's 50th career win, which he took in the Canadian Grand Prix, and actually put him back atop the championship at that point. He also delivered a masterclass in Silverstone, passing Bottas in the closing laps to win the British Grand Prix in front of Hamilton's home crowd, and the victory sparked huge excitement. Vettel had a healthy points lead leading into the mid-season, and it felt like momentum was finally, for the first time in years, with Ferrari. Then came the gut punch. Vettel's home race in Germany, a moment that will live in infamy in my nightmares. Leading comfortably in wet conditions at Hockenheim, Seb slid wide at Sachs Curve and crashed into the barrier on lap 52. In an instant, 25 points evaporated. Seb clutched his helmet with despair as a sure win turned into 0 points. Hamilton won that race from 14th on the grid, and this gave a 32-point swing that flipped the championship on its head. Vettel shouldered the blame, calling it a small mistake with huge consequences, and it was arguably the moment the title began slipping away, and arguably such a strange moment for a driver who was so brilliant in the wet throughout his career. He did bounce back with a victory in Belgium weeks later, passing Hamilton on track in a brilliant move, but there were further missteps. At Monza, Vettel tangled with Hamilton on the opening lap, damaging his Ferrari and spinning to the back. He recovered to 4th, but Hamilton won the race. Meanwhile, Ferrari did what Ferrari did and introduced some technical upgrades that hurt the car's handling, and Vettel and Ferrari seemed to lose their early season harmony. Mercedes pulled away in development that year, and as Vettel's errors piled up and results slipped, critics began to pounce, suggesting that Seb was crumbling under pressure. By Mexico, Hamilton sealed the title with 2 races to go. Vettel candidly just admitted it. There were too many mistakes in 2018. In 2019, Vettel entered Lena, or Lean Lena, as she came to be called. He also got his new car. Doesn't matter. Ferrari promoted rising star Charles Leclerc for the 2019 season, creating a fascinating dynamic. A veteran 4-time world champion Vettel versus the hungry 21-year-old newcomer. The season started with high expectations, with Ferrari looking quick in testing. But the first race in Australia was underwhelming for Ferrari and hinted that Mercedes still had quite the edge. Vettel notched a couple of early podiums, yet by mid-season it was clear that Leclerc could match or best Vettel's pace, especially in qualifying. The first flashpoint came at the Canadian Grand Prix, where Vettel took pole, his first pole in 17 races, and led comfortably until a slight error where he ran right onto the grass under pressure from Hamilton, rejoining the track and squeezing Hamilton right to the wall. The stewards gave Vettel a controversial 5-second penalty for re-entering unsafely, costing him the victory even though he crossed the line first. Vettel was fuming, and in protest after he parked his car, he famously switched the number 1 from Hamilton's car to his number 2. As the season progressed, Leclerc scored brilliant wins in Spa and Monza, Ferrari's first Monza win in a decade, while Vettel struggled with some unforced errors. At Ferrari's home race in Monza, Seb spun at the Ascari chicane and then clipped Lance Stroll as he rejoined dangerously, for which he received a stop-go penalty. It was a low point. He finished 13th on a day his junior teammate won and became the hero to the Tifosi. To Vettel's credit, he kept pushing and finally caught a break in Singapore, aided by team strategy that jumped him ahead of Leclerc. Vettel won the race. It was his first victory in over a year, and notably his 53rd and final F1 win. No foreshadowing, that's just where it is. The big blow-up came in Brazil. While running 4th and 5th, Vettel and Leclerc collided as Seb tried to repass Charles following a restart, causing a double DNF. The team was livid, and Vettel and Leclerc traded barbs about who was at fault. Ferrari's long-term future seemed to be at Leclerc, and Vettel's status at the team was under question. In 2020, Seb was given Lucilia, which is a Ferrari car, not an STI as it may sound, but to be fair, an STI would probably be better than driving the 2020 Ferrari F1 car. This season was disrupted, as you may remember, by a small virus that came from a lab in Wuhan, allegedly. When racing resumed, Ferrari's car, the SF1000, proved deeply uncompetitive, especially after an FIA technical directive had closed a loophole in Ferrari's 2019 engine, costing them power and around $100 million. Vettel struggled mightily with the car's handling. He likened it to trying to dance with a chair, and in the first race in Austria, he managed only 10th. He also got caught breaching COVID protocols by visiting the Red Bull hospitality without a mask, earning a warning, and the on-track frustration continued. At the Styrian Grand Prix, Vettel and Leclerc collided on lap 1, ending Seb's race immediately. The team's morale hit an all-time low as it fell into the midfield. And while Ferrari had been underperforming for a long time at this stage, the midfield was definitely not where Ferrari belonged. At times, he sounded resigned, even sassy on team radio about strategy calls he disagreed with. A bright spot came in a wet-dry Turkish Grand Prix where Vettel excelled in the treacherous conditions and snatched a podium in the last laps, his only podium of 2020 and a small personal triumph. He ended the season 13th in the championship, and Ferrari themselves ended a miserable 6th in the constructors. And though the results were poor, and Ferrari had essentially booted him out of the team, he was, as always, graceful in defeat, singing Azzurro, the Italian song, over the radio at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix to thank all of the crew and factory at the team. Vettel left having won 14 Grand Prix in red and reignited Ferrari's fighting spirit for a crucial few years. There is a side note to the Ferrari time that isn't talked about a lot, which is not only did it seem like Leclerc and Vettel kind of fell apart in 2019 and that the team swung violently in Leclerc's direction for performance reasons, there was also an interesting interview where Vettel discussed how a team was caught cheating, very clearly talking about the engine regulations. And after that point, it seemed like Ferrari very much turned on Vettel, which makes sense given no one is above the team. But fair play to Vettel. Not many people, and especially not many drivers, will speak out against the Ferrari team. Vettel didn't end his career there, though. he was given a seat for a lot of money at an up-and-coming team of Aston Martin. And given that Vettel loved old British stuff like Monty Python and James Bond, this seemed like a match made in heaven, and we were all hopeful that Aston Martin would be able to turn things around quickly. Unfortunately, they haven't been able to, and unfortunately, he's not still there for 2026 when they may. Fortunately, though, he did name his car Honey Rider, and that is fucking brilliant. The season started on the back foot with minimal testing. Seb struggled after years of being on Ferrari to get to grips with the new car. In Bahrain, his debut, he was penalised in qualifying for yellow flags and started last, then collided with Esteban Ocon in the race, finishing a lowly 15th and picking up penalty points on his super licence. As he adapted, some of that old magic resurfaced, and by round 5 in Monaco, Vettel scored Aston's first points with a strong 5th position. The very next race in Baku, the place where only years earlier Vettel had been the centre of some attention, he scored their very first podium with an epic 2nd place after one of the drivers dropped out and after Hamilton forgot how to use his brakes. He followed that up with what would have been another P2 in Hungary, but it was stripped due to technical disqualification, as I'm sure a lot of Vettel fans truly remember. Despite that disqualification, Vettel's on-track 2nd in Hungary demonstrated his wet weather savvy and racecraft once again, and his old vintage self. And maybe more importantly, off the track, Vettel was very much praised for his mentorship of young drivers, namely the young Mick Schumacher, whose father, his hero, Michael Schumacher, was still, unfortunately, in a coma. In 2022, he never publicly released the name of his car to my knowledge. If I'm wrong on that, please let me know in the comments. So I'm going to call that car Lotta Vagina. His final season in F1 was a farewell tour marked with appreciation by the entire paddock. It began bumpily. He caught COVID-19 and had to miss the first 2 races, watching a substitute, the epic Nico Hülkenberg, drive his car. Once back, Sebastian had some standout drives, even as the Aston Martin was only a lower midfield contender, but he often dragged the car into the points through tyre strategy and clever racecraft. Once again, Baku being a highlight as he finished P6 after doing a 360 spin recovery. By mid-season, speculation about Vettel's future mounted, and in July, fittingly via a new Instagram account, he announced his retirement from Formula One, a day that for me was horrible to watch. A really sad day, to be honest. I was hoping he would stay, and if only he had stayed into 2023, imagine all those podiums he could have gotten in that car. Or if they had have even better kept him and then brought Alonso in instead of Stroll, that would have been great. The F1 community's reaction was telling. Not only were fans absolutely in praise of Vettel and wishing him all the best with his future life, drivers and former competitors sang out their praises for Vettel. Even Leclerc, who he had had his moments with, talked about it. Ricciardo, Hamilton, Alonso, all of them came out to praise Vettel in his final days in Formula One. With that, Sebastian Vettel's career ended with 299 race starts, 53 Grand Prix victories, 57 poles, 122 podium finishes, and 4 World Championships, ranking him at the time of retirement 3rd in all-time wins and podiums, and 4th in poles in F1 history. Vettel for me will be missed massively because I feel like since Vettel left, F1 is missing that wit and charm and willingness to say anything. You know, Vettel would always speak out when Formula One or the FIA or even interviewers said anything that they shouldn't have said, not only to him, but to other drivers. Defending drivers when they got called out on things they said over the radio, saying, can you imagine miking up a football player? Defending drivers and shouting out against the FIA, but knowing when to apologise. Driving ruthlessly and aggressively on track, but as we watched him over time, also maturing enough to know when he's wrong and apologising to other drivers like Hamilton in Baku. And just his absolute brilliance on track. Der Weltmeister, driving in the rain in Monza, to brilliantly winning 4 back-to-back championships, 2 of which really did not come easily. Look, I know that recency bias means that people like to say that Vettel had nothing on Hamilton, Verstappen, and, he was just a guy who was quick but led from the front everywhere. But the reality is so far from that. And frankly, given some of his overtakes, especially during those 4 seasons of winning with Red Bull, it's just not true. This guy was going on to be the next Schumacher. And unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. And sometimes recency bias is so powerful in F1. Look, I think at the moment, Verstappen looks like he's the best driver since Schumacher and could go on, as far as I'm concerned, if not already is, probably one of the top 3 drivers in Formula 1 history. But who knows how quickly that'll change. If he sticks around for 7 seasons from now and has winless streaks and loses the championship title contenders and loses 2 young teammates, that history will go away as well. But what won't go away is our fond memories and our love of Vettel. From his ruthless aggression towards his teammate to his brilliance on track and his kindness to the world. Vettel will not only be my favourite driver of all time in Formula 1, he will also always go down as one of the best drivers in Formula 1 history. And hopefully this will go down as a decent start to the first car heroes in this series. Maybe not a 2013 Red Bull, but hopefully better than a 2020 Ferrari. Subscribe.